Again, my name is Sylvia Ang. I'm a lecturer at Monash University, and thank you for being here. I'd like to start by acknowledging, of course, the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, which is the land of the Bunurong people, where I am at Melbourne on the Clayton campus. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledging that this has always been and always will be Aboriginal land. Okay, so today I'm going to present this piece of work, which is in a forthcoming chapter in an edited volume titled Migration Studies and the Decolonial Challenge. The title of my chapter is Decentring Migration Scholars, Centering Paradoxes, Autoethnography as Resistance. So I'll start with some context, I think. In 2023, right, I think about 2 years, a bit more than 2 years ago, I took on the reins of co-convening the Migration and Mobility Research Network. Some of you might know it as MMRN. It's based in Melbourne, Australia. Since then, my co-convener, Dr. Irvin Cabalquinto, and I have noted that most migration scholars who attended our events have migration backgrounds. This led us to conceive of some events, including the Untold Stories workshop, where alongside our invited panelists, Dr. Glenda Mejia, a scholar in the field of migration, mobility, and displacement, she's in RMIT University, we formed a panel to share our experiences of navigating white academia, racism, and doing research with communities in inverted commas, right? Often this is a synonym for migrants of color. These events and also the turnout, right, of migration scholars got me thinking. Many of us are migrants studying migrants, often because we are aware of and have experienced the oppressions migrants face. What about our stories, right? And just pointing you to the quote over there by Akov, they say if the study of and the advocacy for the oppressed must be done principally by the oppressed themselves, hiding our stories could make us part of the problems of speaking for others. Right? I think really, in essence, that is an ethical issue that many scholars, including myself, would like to avoid. It is in this vein that I would like to start thinking about decolonizing migration studies, or in this case, decolonize migration studies vis-a-vis decolonizing migration studies scholars like myself. Most images in this presentation are made by Canva AI, so that's presumably me with my story hiding. Some of the other pictures I will share are of my own. Okay, now before I go further, right, I want to start with some caveats, okay? First, I do not think this chapter, this presentation decolonizes anything, right? Because as decolonization, following Tuck and Young's 2012 work, necessarily involves land reparations to indigenous communities. So I prefer to label this chapter's intention then as decentering migration studies vis-a-vis migration scholars like myself. Second, I don't know what you think about autoethnography, but myself, I used to have a negative bias towards it. The first time I encountered autoethnographies, I dismissed it as narcissistic and a reflection of the state of the academy, right? So when you think about, how there's a lack of funding, plus the pressure to publish equals, using the self as data, right? Instead of seeking, in inverted commas, real data. So it is with quite a bit of trepidation that I embark on this chapter. Now, if you are or were as skeptical as I was, I hope at the very least that my admission of my reluctance and indeed fear of putting myself under the microscope could entice you to read this chapter and hopefully change your mind. Yes, I think we often put our participants, right, our study participants under the microscope, but why are we reluctant to put ourselves under the microscope? I think it's something worth thinking about, right? And also that's a picture of my dog, Mandy, one of two. Yes. Okay. So now when we think about autoethnographies, right, autoethnographies have increasingly been used as methodologies of solidarity and resistance for the marginal. This is not something particularly new, but I think has become maybe more intense in how it's been used in recent years. Now, more recently, migration scholars have also used their personal stories as critiques of dominant oppressive structures. I think, we think a lot about reflexivity in our research, right? Especially in sociology, I think, right? Anthropology and so on. But I think self-reflexivity is especially necessary, right? In a post-colonial world, and the post is in brackets, right? Post-colonial world, where Eurocentrism dictate knowledge production and suppress alternative knowledges. As native intellectuals, such as myself, who have been colonized, Sylvia Winter argues we are caught in a dilemma where I may be only echoing the colonizer's word and may end up reproducing the subordination and impoverishment of the majority worlds to which we belong. And I'm really quoting here from Sylvia Winter. And as scholars, they have discussed the power of autoethnographies have suggested, such as Chawla and Atay cited over on the slide. They suggest that autoethnographies have the potential to do a few things. The first is to challenge dominant narratives and critique Eurocentrism. Second, to oppose spatial homogenization and linear temporal views. And third, to examine the complex dialectical relationship between colonizers and the colonized. And I think importantly, right, the last quote over there that I put on the slide, I think if we are to move beyond the coloniality of knowledge, right, we must first change the stories we live by. And this is why I'm putting my story under the microscope here. Okay, before I launch further into my story, I think it's important to point to the essence of colonial paradigms, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, right? This us versus them kind of negative logic, or the West versus the rest kind of logic is very dominant in colonial paradigms, right? It's what scholars have called the binary, right? Or the color line. Okay, so the color line in terms of white versus non-white, right? Again, quoting Sylvia Winter here because she's got really such good quotes, excellent writing, right? She has aptly surmises really that the color colonial line, right? Which is what we understand these days, right? With regards to colonialism or with regards to even our everyday life, right? Reoccupies the kind of historical place that used to be occupied by the heaven versus earth, supralunar versus sublunar, by the rational humans versus irrational animals. These premises of non-homogeneity in order to enable the selected versus the deselected, and thus deserving versus undeserving status, which has become the organizing principle, right, to function for the nation state, as well as the imperial orders of the Western bourgeoisie, right? So we may have formally, right, not all of us, formally, there may be no longer colonialism, right, formal colonialism. But, in terms of thinking about the nation state, thinking about who's deserving to be a citizen, who's deserving to be a migrant versus who is not deserving of being a migrant, who is not deserving of being a citizen, right? This line, this color line, right, colonial line keeps getting reproduced even in, I think, our everyday lives, right, today. And so then, right, in this chapter, my argument is really thinking about, could autoethnographies that celebrate paradoxes be a method to disrupt binaries and emphasize multiplicities and relationalities, right? Could we disrupt binaries through our autoethnographies? Okay, so now I start by going to my story, right? Still with some trepidation. Now, in the chapter, I share two stories to decenter myself as first a migrant and secondly as a scholar. through thinking of myself as part of the white academy. The second, of course, is very interesting, I think, for a lot of us here as academics, but also it takes quite a lot of time and could be quite sensitive. So I'll just stick to the migrant bit here, I think. So here in this presentation, I will only have time to discuss decentering myself as a migrant. Now, if you're wondering, I was born in Singapore and I am a descendant of migrants. My paternal great-grandfather was a trader from China who settled in Malaya in what must have been before Singapore was, in inverted commas, discovered by the British colonialists. I know nothing about my paternal great-grandmother. I think the patriarchy, of course, is very strong. My maternal grandfather and grandmother came from South China to Singapore pre-World War II, and they endured both British and Japanese colonization. Now, although I know next to nothing about China and had never been there until my 30s, so until I was quite old, really, my Chinese heritage bestowed me with a Chinese surname, Wang. So it's again Wang, yeah. However, my officially documented surname in Singapore is Ang, right? Which you can see from my name, Sylvia Ang. Now, my mom thinks this is a likely mistake that emerged from colonial requirements, which were that names of newborns had to be registered in the Latin alphabet. And of course, there were a lot of difficulties with rendering Chinese characters at that time into the Latin alphabet, right? This is a system that was appropriated by the independent Singapore government, right? Even though when I was born, we were no longer formally colonized, but the Singaporean government took over this system, and it's a system that's still in place today. Now, with this system then, right, it has led to diverse spellings to represent a Chinese character, right? And in my case, I have a relatively rare surname, Wang, right? And so, the spelling of my name in Latin characters has become a complete mismatch to most Mandarin speakers' understandings of Chinese surnames. So I have often been asked if my surname is Hong, which Ang usually represents. So this has led to a perpetual need to explain my surname to Mandarin speakers, including many Singaporean Chinese. Now, this colonial presence in my name does not end here. Although my parents registered my full name as Ang Shiwei Sylvia from birth, this is in the style of, in Singapore, where we put the surname first and we put kind of what we call the Christian name last, right? But Sylvia really was not used often as my name, if any, when I was young. It was not until I was 10 years old when I met a teacher, a Singaporean Chinese teacher, who taught me English, and she was less than proficient in Mandarin, and she told me that she could not pronounce my name Shi Wei. That's my my Chinese name, Shi Wei. She could not pronounce my name, and so she just told me that she would call me Sylvia instead. Now, at that time, I was unhappy about it because the name was actually quite alien to me. Soon, however, in an environment, if you are familiar with Singapore, right, where British English was favored as Singapore's first language, so Singaporeans' first language is English, and when television was dominated by American media, the name stuck. And that's me, of course. I don't think I was 10 years old in that picture, probably younger, but that was the cutest photo I can find for around that age. Okay, so I think the colonial presence in my names doesn't end there. In my mid-20s, I moved to Melbourne, Australia, to pursue my master's and subsequently my PhD. Here in Australia, where there is a large Italian community, Sylvia is often written as Sylvia. There's a different spelling, right? Mine is with a Y, Sylvia, and often people here spell my name as Sylvia with a IL, so Silvia, right? Following Italian norms. Further, not only do I have to explain the messiness of my surname to Mandarin speakers, such as the Chinese communities that I work with, but also to white people who often mispronounce Ang as Ang. Okay, so pointing to colonial presence, right? That quote over there from Anne Stoller. She talks about how colonial presence is an effort to make room for the complex ways in which people can inhabit enduring colonial conditions that are intimately interlaced with a post-colonial condition, right? And that shapes the life worlds we inhabit, right? So the colonial presence in my names show how colonial epistemic violence happens beyond a linear time scale. The temporalities of colonial governance that messed up my great-grandfathers, grandfathers, fathers, their descendants, and my surname, of having to explain my surname to Singaporean Chinese, of explaining my surname to Chinese communities, and of tolerating white Australians' mispronunciation of my surname. All of this create overlays and sensory as well as affective regimes of sound, right? This is all pronunciation of sound, of tedium. There you go again. I have to, explain my name again. Of frustration, right? And this, quoting Anne Stoller here, can bring the persistence of a past to the immediacy of the present, right? It happened when I was born, but it keeps coming back every now and then to the present. And referring to Maybelline and Turnell's work, which is in this edited volume, right? They aptly point out, I think, for my experience, colonialism was not one thing. It is multi-layered, structural, experiential, relational, finished, and ongoing all at once. Colonialism exists in multiple timescapes simultaneously. I think my story, right, at least my story of my names, show how my great-grandfather's history of migration simultaneously overlaps with my settler migration in Australia. These overlapping stories identify our present world as, and I'm quoting Maybelline and Turnell here, as a product and continuation of the duration of colonization, right? This duration of colonization, right? It involves colonial governance, right? From when I was born to now, state appropriation of colonial structures and settler migration. I think my stories exemplify colonialists' system of racial hierarchy where all other races, right, were considered inferior to the British. Again, the color line, right? There was the British and there was the non-British that were below that color line. In Singapore, this led to colonial governance that desired the economic benefits of settler migration enough to register migrants' names, but not enough to treat them as equal human beings, right, who deserve to have their names registered accurately. And as Gloria Anzaldúa aptly put, I quote, because white eyes do not want to know us, they do not bother to learn our language, the language which reflects us, our culture, our spirit, end quote. In Australia, right, this led to a tolerance of migrants of color, including in the white academy, but only so long people like me, right, stay in our place, right, in the lower rungs of the hierarchy of power, of whiteness. My stories also tell of indigenous oppression, where in Singapore, the colonial and later independent state appropriated colonial structures to maintain the indigenous population as a minority, and the Singaporean Chinese population as a majority through importing Chinese settler migrants like my great-grandfather. And in Australia, where in quotes, inverted commas, desirable migrants like myself are imported as part of a settler colonial strategy to dispossess First Nations peoples of their lands. Okay, so quite a sad story so far, but let me go into something hopefully more meaningful now. Now, my names, right, or the mistake, the colonization of my names, it places me in an in-between place, right, or third space, like Homi Baba said, nothing very new there, right? Now, it is one of discomfort when colliding with particular dominant narratives, right? I think names in so many cultures are so important, right? They often reflect parents' aspirations for their children and how they would like their children to be perceived by society. In the slide over there, you can see my Chinese name. You might not be able to read it. It's actually Wang Shiwei, right? That's my Chinese name. And I put it in the trash there. I'm not that I've trashed it, okay? Well, if you're wondering about the meaning of my name, yeah, it is Wang is my last name, my surname. Shi Wei, Shi actually means poem, and Wei actually means a rare flower. So I think my mom, especially, was kind of hoping that I'll be a rare poetic flower, which is of course quite funny, yeah. But it does reflect, I guess, her aspirations for me, right? And it's a very difficult to. My name is actually very difficult to write. A funny story: when I used to be in school, when I was younger, I used to miswrite my own name, and I'll get all my spelling and dictation correct, and I would have written my own name wrongly. Okay, so I think for the Chinese, surnames are also important because it signals kinship, right, with common ancestors, including originating from the same locality, and people with the same surname are regarded as from the same family. So my surname, for example, can be traced to a place in China where apparently everyone that comes from their village has their surname. Apparently, yeah, I know very little about China. I've never visited this place as well. Yet, could my names, right, as symbols of cultural hybridity, also act as a tool to disrupt dominant ideas of being? Scholars, for example, have noted that for immigrants, the third space can serve as a place where their differences are celebrated, countering the simplistic binary of assimilation versus rejection that tends to reduce our experiences to a uniformity and sameness. Now, I think while I have yet to celebrate the messiness of my names, my in-betweenness between assimilation and rejection has certainly been productive. It has led to my commitment to decenter scholarship, where I don't take existing categories and their underlying assumptions for granted. So I'm very attentive. I think my work is very attentive to heterogeneity. This has led to my book, right? And Roger reminded me to do a little plug, my award-winning book on the tensions of contesting Chineseness between Singaporean Chinese and mainland Chinese migrants in Singapore, as well as the heterogeneity between the two groups and within each group in terms of class and gender. Through looking at diaspora and hybridity, I've tried to steer dominant conversations away from all binaries of us versus other, or the West versus the rest, or white versus other. I've also grown increasingly interested in paradoxes. So Gutierrez Rodriguez suggests that remembrance is a complex dialectic of loss and liberation. So I think this autoethnography that I've shared here, it documents a loss of names, but loss can also be an occasion for radical imagination and futurity. Paradoxes, then I suggest, are useful for decentering migration studies in more ways than one. Here, the autoethnography describes a loss, but in remembering this loss, I have documented the epistemic violence that colonialism has inflicted onto myself and many others like me. Now, I just got 2 more slides, okay? So it is here then I would like to introduce the framework of paradoxical integration. So I'm not happy with just ending my story there. I want to go a little bit further. The idea of paradoxical integration, right, is deeply woven into the Autoethnography, if you know about this work, which explores a complex network of dynamic relationships involving opposites. So Autoethnography originated over 2,500 years ago, and is cited as one of the most profound books in the world's philosophy. So it's actually a philosophical book. Now I'm really drawing on Sylvia Ang's discussion of paradoxical integration here. Okay. Now, so to give you an example, right? It can sound very difficult, but to give you a simple example, the Chinese concept of 危机, right? Crisis. It means crisis. Actually combines 2 characters, right? It combines 危, which means danger, and 机, which means opportunity, right? Illustrating the Chinese view that adversity and opportunity can coexist in a dynamic interplay. So as migration scholars who are also native intellectuals, such as myself, we can reject this white man versus other versus native binary to emphasize paradoxical integration, that two so-called opposites, such as colonizer and native, does not necessarily have to be in tension, but can interact to form a state of wholeness. And I think importantly, in the concept of paradoxical integration, the term integration describes how opposing elements can exist together harmoniously without negating or annihilating each other, right? So in the Tao Te Ching, right, paradoxes are never completely resolved, but are continuously reappearing, okay? So this is something I think we perhaps already know, but it's in need of reminding, right? That whether it's decentring, whatever we are decentring, right? Migration studies or of any kind, it is about an ongoing conversation that must include those above and below the color colonial line. And I think to end this chapter and this presentation, I would like to highlight one aspect of paradoxical integration, which is the paradoxical integration of reversal, which I hope will give us hope. Now, the paradoxical integration of reversal describes how one element can lead to or facilitate its opposite. Okay. Now, hold on. I'm not going to lose you just yet. It's a little difficult over a presentation, but I'll get you there, right? Following Xiao Ang's work, okay, the paradoxical integration of reversal is illustrated in Tao Te Ching, where submissiveness, non-assertiveness, and weakness are presented as effective strategies for overcoming hardness and strength. Okay, so in situations where one might find one subordinate or facing difficult circumstances, we can choose a stance of compliant softness as a strategic move to counteract an opponent's strength, right? So we can choose this non-assertive approach to enable us to gain the power of patient perseverance and ultimate strength, which can exercise real power over the other. That last sentence is quoted from Xiao Ang. So I think to illustrate that, right, think about the metaphor of water. This is in the Tao Te Ching, right? There's nothing more submissive and weak than water, right? But at the same time, right, for attacking that which is hard and strong, nothing can surpass water, right? So it is my hope then that this autoethnography, with its softness, right? I hope I've presented to you, its softness, its affect, its emotions, the stories that I've shared, the pictures I've shared, the laughter, the tears, the tedium, the frustration, can be a strategy to overcome the hardness or the violence of colonization. I hope also that in so doing, it will encourage other scholars to decenter themselves, to avoid individual blaming, and instead evoke collective hope. And finally, I want to end with this great quote from Gloria Enzodua. I write to record what others erase when I speak, to rewrite the stories others have miswritten about me, about you.
In terms of the existence and the strength.
Thank you. So that's the end of my presentation, and I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. And we've got lots of clapping coming through. Now, if anyone's got questions, by all means, Natalie Thompson says, wow, thank you, Sylvia, for a great 30 minutes.
Thanks a lot, Natalie. I think Sam has a question. She has her hand up.
Yeah, by all means, Pam, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Sylvia. Thanks for this. Can you hear me? Okay, thanks for this super interesting presentation. I'm currently working on autoethnography, not on my PhD work, but on something else. I just want to know, while you said you've been working on autoethnography, and while you are navigating this terrain called autoethnography, did you come across like questions, criticisms, and when you how was it like when you were presenting your work? How did you navigate this space? Because I'm currently working on a chapter where I'm using autoethnography to talk about my positionality as an insider, writing about the Sri Lankan Tamils, and I get a lot of questions. I just want to know your experience, how you navigate through this space, and like whether you've come across any criticisms doing this work. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sam. It's a great question. As I said at the start of my presentation, I wasn't sure about doing an autoethnography to begin with, yeah, because of my bias, right? I had a kind of a judgment about it previously. Now I think okay, to be fair, right? I think my bad judgment of it in the first instance where I first saw it many years ago was also because it was used poorly. In the sense that I think it was at a presentation, and I think generally the presentation was about, I think, something about challenges that migrants have, something like that. And then the autoethnography actually quoted themselves. So the presenter quoted themselves, used their own quotes to target particular people. So it was, I don't think it was used appropriately. And I think that was why I dismissed it, and I was quite turned off by it then. I think as with all data, right? As with all data, whether it's autoethnography, interviews, or anything else, we have to be careful why we are using this method, and be ready to justify it, of course, right? Which is what you are facing. I think from the perspective of thinking about, how we can use it ethically, and use it to forward something, to forward, whether it's decolonization, right, decentering, or to forward a particular kind of argument that cannot be done through other methods, right? I mean, this is why we choose our methods, right? When we say, I choose interviews, it's because, look, it can't be done through social media analysis, so I got to choose interviews, right? Or I choose social media analysis because it can't be done through interviews, right? I choose autoethnography in this case, and I think you can see it very clearly because I couldn't have interviewed myself. And also, right, I'm not sure that if I interviewed somebody else, I could have gone into so much depth, right? It really requires an understanding of a whole lifetime of narratives, of frustration, of tedium, of names, right? So I think this is something to think about then, right? If you have chosen this method, it must be for a good reason. Then be ready to say then what is it about, using autoethnography that triumphs over other methods. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, very much. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sylvia. I'm Ang, and I'm a current graduate level, master graduate level student. And I have no experience of using this method, but I have come across and I really like your talk today. So I'm wondering, do you have any recommendation or suggestions to students who are relatively new to this method and like considering to apply to my project at certain level? What kind of like suggestion you would give to early or very junior researchers while using this method?
Right. Thanks, Ying, for your question. Okay, yes, of course. I mean, of course, the first thing I would say is read the sorry, doing a plug. Read the edited volume. It hasn't come out yet, but it will come out soon. But it's not just that. I'm happy. If you want to email me, I am happy to send some of these references as well to you. And in my chapter, I note that again, autoethnographies are not new per se. They have been used, for whether it's through storytelling with indigenous communities or with feminists, scholars of color. It's been used actually quite a lot, and has just really intensified, I think, amongst academics in more recent times. So a lot that you can look at for reference. Now, again, I would also say, as I said to Sam previously, it took me quite a while to think about this idea of autoethnography and using it. And it's not that I don't think it's a good method or real method or anything like that, but I think, as with all things, again, we need to be able to justify why we've chosen it over other methods. And also, the other thing then is also, and this is different. This is not, I don't think this is about the hierarchy of who is more senior or not. It's also about, do we have the reflexivity to reflect on our own experiences as if we're a subject? And this actually requires some training. And I don't mean this again like, oh, you know, because you know, I'm a graduate student, I can't do it. It's not like that. I think different people are different because our training backgrounds are different, right? For example, some people are just excellent at interviews, while some people have to, you know, take their time to train and get used to it, right? So it's also good to look at your own reflexivity, right? And really kind of, when you put yourself under the microscope, it's fun, but it's also very strenuous. It's not easy, right? You know, what is it about my story, about my history, that is useful as data? That is not an easy question. In fact, it's actually a lot easier, I would say, to use somebody else's story as data, at least from my perspective. So I think a little bit more carefully about that before you choose it as a method, but definitely read up on what's available out there before you make that decision.
Yeah, I forgot to mention my major concern is more like because lack of research experience might affect how I determine which research method best suits my project. So but I think your answer really responds to my question. Thank you for the answer.
I'm glad. Thanks, Ing. Sarah?
Yeah, thanks for your presentation, and I think you're highlighting the complexities of positionality and declaring positionality, and so I'm just wondering, from a decolonizing perspective, is it useful for, say, I mean, I might deal with gender issues that, to me, it feels vulnerable to expose too much about my own position. But on the other hand, in terms of, say, Indigenous or other ethnic perspectives in Australia, it may be useful for me to declare my whiteness, my Anglo background, but it also feels very vulnerable because are my views to be dismissed because I'm, you know, Anglo white, whatever, which has been the case in some areas in my past, where, you know, declaring, well, where your femaleness was used against you, I guess. So that wasn't something you had to declare; it was just there. Anyway, I'm just wondering about exposing coloniality through our own positionality.
Thanks a lot, Sarah, for your question. It's a great question. Yes, I think you're right, absolutely right. It's all about positionality, isn't it? And vulnerability. I do feel very vulnerable. I feel like I'm being torn apart, torn to bits, allowing myself to be torn to bits by myself in front of 20 plus people. That's how it feels. And this is why I really was very hesitant to pick it up, I think. And I struggled a lot with this chapter. You know, in whatever way you see it now, I actually struggle a lot. And I think, Sarah, I think what you're talking about is really important. And I think, yes, although autoethnographies have been used by many people of marginalized communities, right, including Indigenous communities, families of color, things like that. I actually think it takes a lot of courage to acknowledge whiteness and privilege. And there are scholars that have also done that. Although, of course, I think, at least from my research, it seems like there are less. But I think it takes a lot of courage, really a lot of courage to say, to examine your own whiteness and histories, right? Histories of oppression that are, that are related to that. And I don't think that, and I think that autoethnography, right, and being allowing ourselves to be vulnerable shouldn't be something that only people of color or people from marginalized communities can or should do. Like I said, I feel that you know, as with the metaphor, right, of thinking about paradoxical integration, we need to interact to get wholeness. If we stay as above or below the color colonial line, we will never have that conversation to reach wholeness. And I don't think we can reach wholeness by ourselves, unless we're some of a superhuman. So, in fact, I will welcome more, I think, more sharing of, you know, more sharing of white people putting their whiteness, you know, under the microscope. I feel like, oh, we could be good friends and have more conversations together. I don't know if that answers your question, Sarah, but yeah.
I love your answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Unmute.
Hi, Roger. Can you
Oh,
hear me?
yes,
Sylvia, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, hi. I was just hesitant because I'm actually I'm in a public library. I'll see if I can, yeah, didn't want to distract you though. Can you see me?
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, hi everyone, and hi Sylvia. Thank you so much. And well, first of all, thanks Roger for reading my message and relaying it. But yeah, just just to clarify and reiterate those concerns that I'm keen on, hearing your ideas. Basically, is just to how do you, I think the conceptual innovation that you're introducing here on autoethnographies as resistance and paradoxical integration has much to offer in terms of addressing the issues that I've raised, and with the help of Roger, of course, and trying to imagine and reimagine these things. So maybe just to get a bit more clarity, the first question has to do with a more practical concern, which is basically in occupational health, which I'm interested in. And second, of course, as you say, and in the interest of reflexivity or self-reflexivity, of how do we write this from our perspective, and in the context of obviously of the barriers that are admittedly culturally biased or culturally skewed as well in our practice in knowledge production. So I'd really appreciate your thoughts on that, Sylvia. Thanks.
Thanks, Dino. Right. Thanks for great questions. They're quite big. I'll try my best. I think the first bit is thinking about how we can think about strategies to overcome workplace stigma and trauma caused by racism. Okay, I think the first thing that with presentations, academic presentations, I hope that I'm offering hope, right? By thinking about paradoxes, by reimagining our own stories, and by thinking about interaction, right, with those above and below the color colonial line. Now, having said that, right, when it comes to racism, right, not everybody wants to talk. Not everybody wants to have a conversation, and some people are closed to a conversation. It is not our job. It is not our job to force them to have a conversation with us, or to be so nice to them and play puppy or doormat such that they will have a conversation with us. That is not our job. All right. I think we have to be practical as well. There's so much to do in life, right? We will have conversations with people who want to have conversations with us, right? Like Sarah, right? But those that don't, we just have to say, well, that it is what it is, right? We have to heal. We have to take care of ourselves first, right? If I'm not well, if I'm not happy, I wouldn't be able to do this presentation. I wouldn't be able to think about hope and try to offer hope. That's the first thing. Okay. So know who you want to talk to and know who is just forget about it. And I think the second one is thinking about culturally biased structures. Now, I want to share something that is probably not that will definitely come out with the autoethnography. There's no way to run away from it. It's in that why do I feel safe enough right now to do an autoethnography, right? It's because I have been in academia several years, okay, to be honest, right? I have an ongoing position. I'm not so afraid of offending someone or stepping on somebody's shoes as much as when I used to be precarious. Okay, I'll just be honest about that, right? There's a reason why it emerges at this point, right? So so yes, I'm acknowledging that we are in white academia. We are depending on where we are in that career, more vulnerable at some times, at some points than others. Okay, so I know that's not particularly hopeful. Okay, but again, like I said, it depends on how much energy we have, right? If you have the energy to fight, right, to defend why you've chosen a method that you think is better than others, go ahead and do it, right? I have chosen to do it now because I have less energy. I'm old, much older than you, Dino, and I wanted to be at a place where I don't have to devote so much energy to defending, to fighting, that I do this. Does it make sense? Yeah, because I feel like if I was doing this when I was doing my grad studies, for example, I would have to fight a lot more people, and I would have to expend a lot more energy. Right now, the way I am right now in my position, that there is a little bit less opposition to what I do in my time and my work. So I'm being very practical here, and I don't know whether that helps you, Dino.
It does, it does. Thank you so much, Sylvia. And I think that was actually very courageous of you to come out of it and just being honest. I think that needs to be heard. Really appreciate your ideas and your courage. Thank you, Sylvia.
Thanks, Dino.